On December 3, just this month, 2017, Malacanang, through spokesperson Harry Roque, said that the NPA was, to quote, a spent force. And perhaps even more impressively, in March 2017, Edgardo Arevalo, chief of the AFP Public Affairs Office, said that the military considers the NPA a spent force compared to decades ago. So if the NPA has been characterized by the armed forces and by the palace as a spent force until as recently as early this month, why extend martial law using it as one of the key reasons? Mr. President, as a former government peace panel negotiator, I know that martial law or any repression of civil liberties, such as the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, actually spikes NPA recruitment. In fact, if we look back at history, in 1984, the military began its biggest offensive against the CPP-NPA. In 1985, just the following year, the NPA peaked its numbers with 30 to 45,000 members, and its acts of violence reached their height with 1,282 military and police deaths and 1,362 civilian deaths. So, bearing this in mind, what exactly do you hope for martial law to achieve with respect to the CPP-NPA? But again, what you yourselves, resource persons, have called already a spent force.
This is going to be a time-bound solution. By 2005.
Mr. President, may I be allowed to reply to the good senator? Ma'am, yesterday I said that we did not know where Secretary Roque got his facts that this
maybe from the AFP secretary
is a spent force, because just a couple of weeks back there is an intensification of attacks by the CPP-NPA, especially in eastern Mindanao and also in southern Mindanao. The reason why they are now part of the martial law, they are not actually the main target of the martial law, but still the continuing rebellion of the ISIS-inspired groups in Mindanao, is because they are already branded as a terrorist organization, and in fact, because of that, they have also alerted or directed their troops on the ground to intensify attacks on military troops. That's why they are part of the martial law.
But good Secretary, ano po nangyari sa pagitan ng Marso kung kailan hindi lang yung presidential spokesman ang nagsabi, pero yung AFP chief ng Armed Forces Public Affairs Office na spent force sila, and then 9 months later may intensification of attacks. Nakakamanghalang kung
Can I
paano
ask
biglang
Senator
nangyari
Hontiveros to wind up?
I have 2 more questions, Mr. President.
I'm sorry, but time is up.
I will just await, with the good Mr. President's indulgence, the response of the good Defense Secretary, and then I'll place my last 2 questions in one go for the responses of the resource persons.
Mr. President, the reason why there was this lull of operation of the CPP-NPA is because we were talking to them. Meron tayong peace process na ongoing ng panayan, kaya naglaylo sila and they did not attack. And that does not mean that they are a spent force. Medyo nag-ano lang sila, hindi gumagalaw. But after that, they started to attack us, so that's why we are attacking them as well.
May I just note, Mr. President, to close this first question, that the good Defense Secretary has still not denied that the AFP characterized the NPA as a spent force.
Ma'am,
My last 2 questions, Mr. President, what are the limitations or gaps of our current laws? For example, the Terrorism Financing Prevention and Suspension Act and the Human Security Act. What are the limitations or gaps of these laws that the declaration of martial law might be able to address? What are the strategic advantages available under a declaration of martial law that are not otherwise available under these existing laws. Because otherwise, Mr. President, martial law is a last and drastic response where existing laws and policies are insufficient. And for my last question, Mr. President, what is the threshold of public safety used by Malacanang in determining that martial law is warranted? The letter of the President merely states that the government needs to pursue the bigger task of rehabilitation and the promotion of stable socio-economic growth. Rehabilitation and socio-economic growth, Mr. President, are not the objectives of a declaration of martial law. Martial law contemplates a public safety threat that is existing and pressing. So these are my last two questions, Mr.
Can we ask
President.
the resource persons to answer or respond?
At the request of the President, the grounds relied upon for the request for the extension of martial law, very briefly, is that the Hapilon and the remnants of the groups of Hapilon and Maute brothers continued to rebuild their organization through recruitment and training. That's number one. The Turaifi group was likewise monitored to be planning to conduct bombings. The BIFF continues to defy the government by perpetrating violent incidents. The remnants of the Abu Sayyaf group remain a serious concern, in that the NPA took advantage of the situation and intensified their rebellion. Now, Mr. President,
Can I ask the minority leader to wind up? Because
can I ask for an extension, Mr. President?
up to... Okay, I will give the minority leader next 2 minutes from...
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the situation, the Constitution is clear. That Congress can only extend the proclamation of martial law in case of an actual public uprising and taking of arms against the government. That was the decision in the case of Lagman versus Executive Secretary Medialdea, which upheld the proclamation of 216 that required actual rebellion or public uprising. The government, through Secretary Lorenzana, as we said on October 23, declared the rebellion in Marawi City to have been terminated, and that it no longer exists. It is on this basis that we believe that the continued imposition of martial law and the extension of martial law up to December 31 of next year does not find basis under the Constitution, and is in fact unconstitutional if this Congress would grant that extension. As clearly stated by Justice Hardilesa in his concurring opinion in Lagman versus Vidaldea, rebellion under the Constitution refers to a state of rebellion. There is no more state of rebellion as admitted by our resource persons. These are only threats at this point. Actual armed conflict is the basic foundation for the continued imposition of martial law. And it is on this basis, Mr. President, that it is our view that the extension does not find basis under the Constitution and would be unconstitutional. The President cited the NPA for the first time in this extension. The NPA was not cited in the original request. Now, the NPA conflict has been there for the last 4 decades. Suddenly, in the extension today, request for extension today, the NPA is cited as an additional ground for martial law extension in Mindanao. Mr. President, I end this intervention with a question. Is this now a prelude to declaring martial law nation?